Well, the Mississippi State Capitol is one of the most beautiful in the nation. I have been to 42 other state capitals in this nation, and ours is as pretty as anybody's here. It's a majestic building, and I still get chill bumps when I walk into this thing. I just go, wow, 36 years in this chamber was remarkable. And I look forward to coming to work every day, if nothing else, just to be under this dome and to know that I was engaged by my people to make a difference in the state of Mississippi. Well, I come from a long line of Mississippians who were sort of Mohicans, and they were people of the soil. I come from a strong agricultural background. My grandfather graduated from Mississippi State in 1923 after a couple of Purple Hearts in World War I with the late great Senator John C. Stennis. So we come from an agricultural background, and that agricultural background certainly lends itself to old Roosevelt, or as some would say, my grandmother would say Roosevelt kind of Democrat. And so that's what I was brought up as, and I didn't venture far. Back in 1980, a man named Ronald Reagan sort of swept me off my feet, and I got off my medicine a little while and thought I was a Republican for 18 months, and I got over it and got back on my medicine, and I've been a Democrat ever since. Yellow Dog, probably a pretty good case for that. I mean, I was pretty loyal. When I say Democrat, it means progress to me. I a long time was considered one of the most liberal white members of the Mississippi Legislature. And I never was ashamed of that, really, because it depends on how you define liberal. In the state of Mississippi, any freaking thing to the left of Attila the Hun is liberal. I mean, it's just the way it works in this state. This is a red blood red state. And these people are interesting, but blood red sometimes is totally against the interests of the majority of the people in Mississippi. And I just felt honest about public service and that I had to remain a Democrat, and I still am to this good day. Now, the National Party, that's another thing. I'm really sort of sick and tired of both of them. I'd make a good case that I'm a libertarian and about the most independent soul that's ever sat under this dome. I think you could back that up with facts. You know, I got asked many years ago in my early political career. I was on a program at Ole Miss with Governor Winter, and some national press person asked me, "Why are you a Democrat?" And it didn't take me 2 seconds. I said, I was raised by a Christian mother in a Christian home. I've always said I thought Jesus was a Democrat. I wouldn't want to put a label on the sovereign grand architect of the universe, but certainly he hung out with lepers and whores and tax collectors, and the woman that committed adultery, he drew the line in the sand, said, go and sin no more. He was into redemption and not punishment. And I think that's what Democrats are into, and it's what I'm into. Government is all about empowering people to be something that they otherwise could not be. And that's the way I always looked at it. And I don't think my brothers and sisters today in the Republican side of life look at it that way. It's more specialized, it's more money-driven, it's more interest-driven. And I never was into that. I just never was into that and never will be into that politically. Well, growing up on a rather large farm with a dad that was probably pretty prosperous, and my 5 brothers and I, and maybe even my mother, didn't realize how prosperous he was because he worked us somewhat as slave labor, if you want to know the truth, and I put that in quotes. We fed couple of 100 head of cattle before we went to school every morning, and the minute school was out, we'd don a tractor and work into the night and that kind of thing. But growing up that way, and growing up interestingly enough, on a farm that was large enough that it was my the six Holland boys and a lot of African American friends that we had, I learned that some people didn't have the same birthright that I had, and I learned it early. And so special considerations, not necessarily, but opportunity. And I learned by my mother, my late mother, who said, you've always got to take care of the least, the last, and the most vulnerable amongst us. And I have tried to do that all of my life, professionally and politically. You know, growing up on the soil, on the land, Thomas Jefferson said, those that till the soil are the chosen people of God. And I believe that you learn a lot with an agricultural background, and Mississippi's heritage is basically agricultural. If you were born 1965, 70, and before, you had an agricultural background somewhere in your life, and you learn to conserve resources, natural resources. You learn to make it fit against the most austere times and situations. Even then, when farming was as chance as it is today, without the modern technology and the modern machinery, it was a lot of risk involved, everything from the weather to pestilence and disease and that kind of thing. And so I just learned to conserve energy, and conserving energy is more than a fuel matter. Conserving energy is working smart, thinking analytically. I'm pleased to say I had a dad and had people around me who did that. And it's been one of the most valuable things that I've had to carry through life. And I like to try to pass that on to the people who work for me now and people who I mentor. I mean, I've got a pretty good case history to say, you know, don't squalor things away. Take seriously your responsibility. Take seriously the wonderful natural resources that we have in the state of Mississippi and develop them. Okay. Well, I was blessed in my second term of being in the legislature, of being chosen to be chairman of the Agriculture Committee, then speaker, fresh speaker, newly elected speaker who appointed me from Lee and Prentiss County. Tim Ford made the statement as he appointed me chairman of agriculture that the reason he did that is because it was one of the few cultures that I knew anything about, agriculture. But I knew a lot about it. I knew a whole lot about it, and I knew a lot about energy independence and how valuable it was to this state that was so agriculturally based. And so we were able, through that 16-year tenure, to do a lot of things and to set the stage for future generations to look to energy independence. Well, after a 16-year tenure as chairman of Agriculture Committee and simultaneously being appointed to the Appropriations Committee and being named chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee for Healthcare, which included the funding of public health, mental health, vocational rehabilitation, and Medicaid, and other health issues. I had a broad spectrum of responsibility in dealing with health care, and I liked it. I liked it coming in, and it was such a wonderful experience for me to be able to chair something that I was born into, agriculture, and yet have major total funding influence on all of health care. I sat on the health care committee from the day I got here till the day I left, and for 8 years was able to be chairman of the Public Health Committee. And oh, did we do wonderful things in healthcare during those years. It was a time of enlightenment and empowerment. We had to conquer things. It was real interesting to me when we went into the COVID pandemic. We had been through the AIDS pandemic here in Mississippi, and I was able to fight every soul under this dome to match equally Ryan White funds to buy the 3 drug cocktails so our citizens who were plagued with the AIDS virus could maintain themselves, could live. You talking about pro-life, let's talk about what that program has done for the state of Mississippi. Now, that was a pro-life issue. It is very rare today that anybody's dying of AIDS or even HIV, because we were able, through the help of Big Brother in Washington, to have funds sent here to publicly issue drugs to these people who were plagued with this disease so that they could live, they could work, and they could maintain their families. That's one of the most pro-life issues that I was involved with in all of my years. Well, if I have my timing right, the AIDS pandemic started in the mid to late 80s. I was already a licensed undertaker and was starting ownership in the funeral business then, and folks were dying unbelievably, just like they died with COVID. Maybe not quite the numbers, but it was a pandemic. And I was a licensed, pretty skilled embalmer who was taught universal precautions when I went to embalming school, so I wasn't scared of what took someone's life. I was available to do what needed to be done to provide a bridge from death back to life for everybody. So I was doing trade embalming all around for these people. Other funeral homes were telling folks they had to bury that day if they died of AIDS. And I sort of called baloney on all of that. And word got around, and it really, interestingly enough, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, buoyed my first business. And I treated those people just like everybody else would have wanted to be treated. And we went through the ceremony, the celebrations, and moved on from that. But it gave me a keen perspective of what a pandemic was, and especially an AIDS pandemic. I was able to study the literatures, to hook up with Washington, and I'm not sure I would have been that enlightened had I not had the literally eyeball-to-eyeball experience with the pandemic that I had through my chosen profession of undertaking. So it is a classic example of a lay legislature and what each individual in this 174-member body can do through their own life experience if they're willing to do it to move the public from point A to point B. The thing that pro-life means to me, as guns, God, and gays galvanized the conservative movement some 2 to 3 decades ago, pro-life just suddenly lost its real meaning, in my opinion, and it became how you stand on abortion, a woman's right to choose. Well, that was important to me, very much important to me, and I always said that it's hard for me as a legislator to make a woman's decision choice by law. But beyond that, pro-life, I remember the first bill I ever carried under this dome was a bill to expand 5 mandatory genetic screenings for newborns in Mississippi to 45 mandatory screenings. It took me a whole 4 years to do that. But I had an old late professor named Dr. Jackson out at UMC that I befriended, and Dr. Jackson was the head geneticist out there, and he said, do you realize what kind of life issue it would be if we caught these diseases when these newborns, especially these impoverished newborns, come into our family in Mississippi? And Dr. Jackson sold me on that idea immediately, and I went to work. It cost some money because Medicaid pays for a lot of it. But pro-life to me was everything from that to building 79 homes for adult mentally handicapped people so that they could reside in peace, in comfort, in safety, in progress until their end day in the state of Mississippi. Another pro-life issue to me, meaning I am for life. We are in a situation today where we can't get even 2 months for postpartum care passed, where the federal government will pay 90 cents of the dollar bill and possibly keep us from having a child, or a mother for the matter, who cannot get through postpartum, who needs help. And if not help, the health problems are so significant throughout life, and 99% of Medicaid's going to pay the bill anyway. It's not wise policy to just be limited to pro-choice or pro-life in the terms of abortion. It is important to do things for our citizenry from onset. That can be conception, if you want to get it that far, all the way to the end, providing untold numbers of Section 1115 waivers to our state Medicaid program so that a senior citizen does not have to immediately go to a skilled nursing home, but Medicaid can provide through assisted living, through all of the steps into ultimate skilled care in a nursing home. That's a pro-life issue. And I was there to help create all those 1115 waivers. And I think it's a beautiful example of where Steve Holland comes from, the font from which I flow when I talk about pro-life. When I came to the legislature in 1984, Medicaid was a big subject. It was only 12 years old at the time, and I can remember one of the first critical votes was to cap it at $90 million. In 2019, the Medicaid budget was well over $1 billion. So that shows you how it grew. But the fact of the matter is, it was an old-fashioned way of Medicaid expansion. 1115 waivers, all of the federal government allowances to allow the states to design a Medicaid program that was specific to their population, to their health care needs, to their provider needs, started happening in the 90s, early, mid, and late 90s. And states were allowed by the federal government to be very creative. And then, of course, during the presidency of President Obama, we had the big rollout Medicaid expansion to where under the old federal law, you capped it at 100% of your federal poverty level. You could extend it up to 137%. And by doing so, you took in what is normally termed the working poor, people who do work, who work 40 plus hours a week, a lot of times in less than good jobs, more menial jobs, but they're citizens and they're respecting labor. And yet they can't get health care because their employers cannot provide it. Medicaid expansion, again paid at 90 cents on a dollar by the federal government, would have allowed hundreds, more thousands of Mississippians to get on Medicaid and have health care and be more productive than even what they are, have more opportunities to be successful in their life than what they have at the time, and in the meantime, provide an economic basis for the providers in the poorest state in the nation to have a lift up paid for by the United States federal government primarily. It was a win-win from the beginning. It had a bad name attached to it, and our current operatives, our current majority party in this state just still cannot swallow the pill of Obamacare. There's a lot of blood on their hands for that, and it will be for a long time. And it's just absolutely ludicrous and ridiculous to me that that has not happened, and it breaks my heart because I was always there from the beginning. I was even there in the federal hearings when the federal Congress was wanting to expand Medicaid. So it's the right thing. Call it what you want to. I wish I'd call it Trump care. Maybe somebody would get excited about it then, and realize that it was for the common good, for the good of the economy, for the good of doing something about the atrocious health disparities that we have in the state of Mississippi. And we got them. And they're always not getting better, unfortunately. Budget cuts, no expansion of Medicaid, sort of just a dead in the trough health care policy. The dog won't hunt. It won't hunt over the long haul in this state. So we've got to avail ourselves to what is available to us. And this legislature as of 2023 has not done that yet. Well, it is the difference. It is the difference in being progressive and not being progressive. If I need to define progressive, progressive means doing things that will not only help your people today, but will have outcomes throughout the years and even into the future, almost from a legacy standpoint. It is monumental in changing the face of healthcare that is in a major crisis and has been for a good long while. We did better in the 90s and the first decade of 2000 than we're doing now, which is no reflection on anybody except our policy has not been mainstream enough to provide the resources to patients and providers to get the kind of health care that they need so they can stay healthy. Education isn't a component of that. We've done a little bit better on education through various resources, but somebody got to pay for it somewhere along the way. And this was the perfect way for the poor state in the nation to accept 90 cents from the federal government to pay for 100% of their health care bill. Oh, bah humbug for not doing that. Well, they just don't want to do it. They think they fear the 10%. They're fearing the 10% now with $3.2 billion state government surplus. Hello. Call Grandma, please, and get her to start praying. It is the stupidest public policy. I am not even smart enough with 3 college degrees to understand the mentality of at least having a hearing. Not that there needs to be any hearing. This basement has got enough studies about what that would do with this state to burn 7 wet mules, and they won't do anything about it. So you're going to have to ask somebody that's less enlightened than me why they won't do that. It's got to be politics, and it's got to be the name that's attached to it. We can't even, not only expand Medicaid, we can't even get a woman help and a child beyond 2 months, 60 days. Every other state in the nation's adopted that except Mississippi. Hello out in the hinterlands. I don't know why the people don't just rise up in complete revolt over that alone. Hospitals are closing right and left. They're on shoestrings. They are in the red. They are losing practitioners. We went to great pains to start the rural physician program to train Mississippi doctors to go back to rural Mississippi, which is about anywhere, including downtown Jackson, if you want to know the truth. And yet and still, because of lack of funds flowing into the system and an overabundance of population that has no insurance, they're killing themselves. The dagger is piercing the very heart, soul, and putting our healthcare institutions, everything from hospitals down to rural clinics, on life support. That's not right. That should not be. Ever. I hope that Mississippi will continue to deal with the racial issue that's plagued us literally since the beginning of statehood, if you want to get right down to it. And certainly in modern times, even since the civil rights movement of the 60s, race has no place in our state. Look, if you are a child of God, then we're all brothers and sisters. That's another lesson my grandmother and my sweet late mother taught me. And so we're all the same. If you're a have or a have not, we have the same parentage, spiritually at least, which should guide and allegedly does guide most Mississippians. I begin to question that from time to time. The Bible thumpers who stand before their church to have a political picture made and then come down and vote against Medicaid expansion and against postpartum care and against all these life issues. It's hypocrisy to me. I want to see race and class become more meshed in the state of Mississippi, and I spent 36 years trying to do that under this dome, with a certain amount of success in some areas and miserable failure in others because of the way we are. You know, Faulkner said the past is not even past. And that could never be more true than today. And we're just doing wrong-headed policy to correct a generational problem. And it just digs the hole deeper and deeper and deeper and makes it harder to fill over time. I don't know how long this will last. I have no idea. I don't know when Mississippians will once again arise, awaken, and come to their sensibilities about policy, public policy, that is to their benefit instead of race-driven, class-driven, special interest-driven. It's got to happen at some point or we're going to be in trouble. I think in Mississippi, I've been blessed in my lifetime to travel the entire lower 48, even Alaska. I hadn't been to Hawaii yet. And to travel to foreign countries and to study very carefully cultural ambiguities, class situations, and no good government lasts over the long haul that does not do something about their class and economic chasms. And I just want to be optimistic and think that we're making progress in the state of Mississippi. But if you analytically study policies of the last 10 to 15 years, it's hard to make a case for that. It really is. If you look at major issue to major issue, everything from taxation. I mean, guess what? We're still taxing groceries. One of 6 states, I think it is, in the nation that still taxes groceries. Yet we gave the largest income tax cut in the history of the state 4 or 5 years ago, and darn if they don't keep on doing it and keep on. Well, that's only causing class divisions, not class healing and economic healing. And they want to couch it in the middle class, a middle class tax break. A middle class tax break, my ass. It is not. I'm sorry. It is not. It's penny wise and pound foolish is what it is, and it's not helping our situation at all. A poor state like Mississippi has to depend on the government, whether you like it or not. You curse the darkness all you want to. But when the cold gray light of day arrives every morning, we've got the same freaking problems, and they're getting worse, not better. Now, that's not a good-headed government policy. And it's why we have got to either, within the current reigning junta, get some enlightened people who will burst that up and see what progress really means beyond today, beyond a tax cut today, beyond this conservative governmental philosophy that we have, and get on to more progressive things that will not only fill the hole today, but will provide a foundation 5, 10, 20 years from now for this state to actually realize its full potential. And that's where I always came from, and it always grieved me when we didn't do that. And when I left this august body, it was somewhat with a broken heart, I'll be honest with you, because, again, you can I have lived modern Mississippi history right here under this dome. And I don't want to sound elitist by saying this at all, but from the day I walked in here in 1983 to the day I left in 2019, there is about 25 years of unbelievable progress in everything from public education to public health to cultural enlightenment, on and on and on, the humanities. And then you take the last 12 to 15 years, and it was like you piled dirt in the hole that you had just, or dug dirt out of the hole that you had just filled. And so I don't know, I grieve. I wish, I even pray that the citizens of Mississippi will realize that there's still opportunity and there's still hope, but this beast has got to be slain pretty soon, and you can fill in the or. And I'll be glad to challenge anybody at any of the courthouses in the state of Mississippi to a debate on this issue. And I want them to prove me wrong. I don't think they can. 36 years is a pretty large span of legislative service. I mean, we went through in the 90s and early into this century this business about, oh, it's time for term limits. And I can appreciate that to a degree because I'm beginning to think maybe nothing short of time limits is going to break this situation that we're in now with this far-right government. However, you cannot limit the will of the people in a democracy. And for whatever reason, the people kept electing me and electing me and electing me 9 terms. And I was so humbled and so honored every time that they would do so. And I pledged to them the same thing that I think will be a part of my political legacy. I'll take responsibility for the failures, and I will also be totally responsible for the progress. And maybe more than most legislators that come in as freshmen, I had left Mississippi State with my undergraduate, gone and worked in Washington, D.C. on the lap of the late, great Congressman Jamie Whitten, who still has the congressional tenure record in Washington, 53 years, 3 months, and 21 days. I didn't quite make that, thank God. I'd be in a box headed back to Plantersville if I had, probably. But the bottom line is, I learned what tenure meant to him, and I learned how a man with vision could capture that vision and sell it to his colleagues in a democratic fashion. One thing that grieves me today, there's no committee meetings, none. Oh my God, people wanted, on the one hand, part of my legacy is people wanted to serve on every committee I ever chaired. On the other hand, they went, my God, I'm going to starve to death for lack of food, because my hearings would be 7 and 8 hours long sometimes. I mean, even the porters could come in and testify if they wanted to, because when you make public policy, it needs to be all inclusive, and that was important to me. And I do think that will be part of my legacy. I'm not being vain when I say this, but in 36 years of service, I never, ever lost a bill on the floor of this house that came out of a committee that Steve Holland chaired. Was that me? Nope. I surrounded myself with people who wanted to work, who were enlightened. I allowed the opposition as well as the proponents to have their day in court. And then the rest of the time, I would threaten my subcommittee chairman with their damn life if they brought a bill out that my committee was not unified on, or at least we could get through the floor of the House. One bill on one particular day, which was a fight between the chicken integrators and the chicken growers, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, where the big boys were running over the little boys and starving them to death. We lost that bill the first day it was presented from the Agriculture Committee on a tie vote. We held it on a motion to reconsider whereby it failed, and the next day we brought it up and won by 10 votes. And we established a Growers' Bill of Rights. It's still ruling the state today. An example of what, and maybe the largest crowds that ever gathered under this dome gathered in that particular legislative session, because poultry is one of the largest commodities in the state of Mississippi. It's particularly important to Central and South Mississippi. I'm from about far north as you can go, but it was an important issue because it was a statewide issue. And I held hearings, and I let everybody from Tyson in Arkansas to come in and spew his venom to the people of my committee, and then I had to tell him to get the hell out of the Capitol because I'd had enough of him, to poor farmers who had staked their whole life, their whole future on loans that were controlled by the integrators, and chicks and feed and medicine and everything else supplied by a big boy who would suppress them if they didn't do what they wanted to do. Everything from suppressing the prices to the commodities themselves that allowed them to be successful in their production. That will be a part of Steve Holland's legacy. Fight the bear. Fight the bear, and fight the bear until you either slay the bear or it slays you. And if it slays you, you hope to God that you have put enough inspiration and dedication and preparation in one of your colleagues that they will continue the fight somewhere in the future. I think that will be the Steve Holland legacy. He died a very wealthy man, actually, in my county, and he came from a wonderful group of folks, but he made it to the second grade, and he said he only made it to the second grade because his brother got sick and his daddy made him go in his place for a year. And old Cliff lived to be 93 and owned about a goodly portion of South Lee County by the time he crossed those chilling waters of Jordan to that land that's fair and day. But Cliff was on his tractor one day when I was early campaigning. I went by to see him, and he stopped the tractor and expectorated like that. And, you know, he said, "Holland, I hear you running for public office." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "Why would you want to do that?" And I said, "Well, Cliff, I just think I can make a difference." He said, "Well, the legislature is the only place I know of run by the inmates themselves. I don't know why you want to fool with it." He got to see me almost through the entire 36 years. And he became my number one supporter. And he could never, ever say enough about the way I was handling things. The only time Cliff ever beyond that day made any comment that was at least bit negative is I went to see him after we had a legislative pay raise up. And we sat there, and he drank a good bit of corn whiskey, and I sipped on a little ice myself, and we were just having a sort of a great uncle, great nephew conversation. And Cliff said, "About that damn pay raise, son." I said, "Oh, Cliff, I'm never going to vote for a pay raise for myself. I didn't go down there and make a living. I make a living in the private sector." He said, "You're a damn fool. You ought to tripled it because you're worth it." I didn't do that, but it was pretty good idea on Cliff's part. The Mississippi legislature throughout the annals of history has been an interesting body just because it is generally and historically reflective of the people of the state. I think it's gone more amiss now than it's ever gone. But the fact of the matter was, you had people from counties like Greene County and Lee County and Madison County and Adams County and Tunica County who were very reflective of the people that sent them here. And so that would be all the nuances of those cultures, those people, whether it was a strong agricultural background, a strong industrial background, a bunch of loggers, farmers, garment company workers, preachers. We had them all to come to the legislature. And so it made for an interesting collection of souls, if you will. But I think the thing when I came here that they don't have now, that may have made the catalyst for the progress that started being made when in 1987 we toppled the Delta regime and put the hillbillies of North Mississippi somewhat in charge of the state, was a place called the Sun and Sand where we all stayed. It wasn't any sun there much, and it wasn't any sand, by God, not nary drop of sand, but it had about 300 rooms, and it was nothing more than a legislative frat house is what it was. So we'd argue and cajole and carry on over here, and then we'd go over there. It had a little nightclub attached to it called the Patio Club. We would gather around the Patio Club, and lobbyists would come about us. Our constituents would come about us, and then we would leave there when that sucker shut down at midnight, and we'd go sit in the game room at the Sun and Sand, the Kon-Tiki, and we would finish out our night, and then by 5:30 or 6 in the morning, 15 to 20 of us had gathered around that huge table in the restaurant for breakfast. There were more bills passed, no ifs, ands, and buts, for about 40 years in this state, maybe even as much as a half century, at the Sun and Sand than ever passed under the dome of this Capitol. The most classic of those is probably the 1987 highway program. We had argued it here. We had taken it to the people, to every courthouse in the state, an idea basically conceived by about 8 or 10 of us hillbillies, Appalachian guys and girls from up in North Mississippi, Northeast Mississippi particularly. Former Speaker Billy McCoy, one of the leaders. The late, great John David Pennebaker is one of the leaders. Federal Judge Mike Mills. I can go on and on. It was a wonderful group of folks who bonded together through the sun and sand as much as anything. And we decided that we were tired of 2-lane roads because we had 0 4-lane. And we decided that we were never going to get ahead of the economic curve, not in a battle of regionalism, but in a battle of all-inclusiveness, because you had I-20 this way, you had 10 on the coast, you had other arteries that were going through the state, but Northeast and the Delta were basically left out of any 4-lane highway program, that if the big boat of Mississippi was going to rise, we all had to have our share of 4-lane highway programs. That thing ultimately passed by the friendships that we Northeast Mississippi legislators had made with our brothers and sisters from the Gulf Coast. People like Big Jim Simpson and Glenn Indris. And I forget some of them. I guess they're all smoldering in their grave now. Most all of them. It's been a long dang time ago. But they were people who were open-minded, who were statesmen, who understood what we asked for when we said, we've got to have 4-lane roads and connect this state to the rest of the Southeast. And we put our money where our mouth was in that program. You couldn't vote for it. Now, the easiest thing to do in this chamber is everybody come up with all these brilliant ideas, and they'd pass the idea and then wouldn't fund the damn thing. Well, that's akin to kissing your grandma when she gives you the tongue, sort of. I mean, it's just not the right thing. We said, you're going to pass this 4-lane program, and you're going to pay for it as you go. And a couple of gentlemen from the coast, through meetings that we had at the Sun and Sand, pulled it over the Rubicon. And now there are 4-lane roads all over the state of Mississippi. We got Nissan, we got Toyota. Columbus has done miracles, Lowndes County, with PACCAR and all of their big industry, because we were farsighted enough to pass a pay-as-you-go 4-lane highway program. Maybe one of the greatest things that happened in my 36 years. Well, the lottery passed the year that I left the legislature, but we had untold votes before. The vote, more so than the lottery or the issue that I was involved with, is an interesting political dynamic. I gambled farming growing up. That's about the biggest gamble you can have, if the truth be told. But my father before me was not scared of a gamble, and I'm not scared of a gamble. And I made a pretty good living, and he made a pretty good living because he was a man of chance. If he could get a bank to go along with him, he'd buy every stick of land. He often said I didn't want to own all the land that he could buy. He just wanted all the land that joined his. And that was his philosophy always. And so I was not opposed. I'm by heritage a Methodist, and we're somewhere middle of the road, if not many Sundays totally falling off the cliff. So here again, I aligned with my coast buddies on casino gaming, and they needed help. They got no help no more than we got any help on the 4-lane highway program from the coast. They got no help in the hills except the late Ed Perry, the late Tim Ford, and Steve Holland. And we were able to pull that off with our votes. And that was the gaming issue that I was most involved. I always said that a lottery was not going to bring in what they thought, but I think it has. I may have been wrong on that issue. It's not doing bad. I just hated to devote its proceeds primarily to transportation issues, because you got to have your highways and you got to maintain them. We built them. Now they've got to be maintained, and lottery is at best a subjective form of revenue. Casino gaming, we were able to build these mental health facilities, improve health care, build FQHC rural clinics. Oh my gosh, we use that money so positively for the citizens of the state of Mississippi. It's not where it was, because guess what? All the country caught on to it. So you no longer had to catch the plane and fly to the Gulf coast to gamble. You can gamble in Arkansas, and you can gamble everywhere now almost. But partnerships came about through people who were somewhat enlightened along the way and were willing, through whatever means, to either swallow their political cover and take a chance. And that's how we got a lot of things done in the state. And a lot of it came down to the camaraderie that we had. Now, don't you think for 1 second that Democrats didn't claw each other's eyes out on issues. The modern Republican political movement is pretty well solidified. It comes leadership down. We would slay the leader in 2 seconds if we thought he was wrong, or she. It's been he, unfortunately. I wouldn't mind seeing a woman speaker or lieutenant governor myself, because I think women are bright by and large. But here's the deal. We would sit down over the sun and sand, or we would sit down over a glass of whiskey, or we would sit down around a fire that we would build out in the courtyard of the sun and sand, and we would work matters out. You don't have that anymore. It's top-down, little tin soldier style leadership, and not good for democracy. I'll say that again. Not the best anyway. I would assume forces from Las Vegas came in here. I don't know. I can't say that I'm the guy who sat around and got tanked up and said, shit, we need casino gambling. Yeah. That wasn't me that did that. But it didn't take me long to join the forces. Yeah. Yeah. So I just soon leave that alone, because I don't remember. I remember old Big Jim Simpson came to see me one night, and Squirrel Phillips, I couldn't think of his name, came to see me. And they said, Holland, do you reckon you might could vote for gambling? I said, well, my family's gambled all their life. You talking about legalized gambling? And they said, yes. I said, throw me a bill out. I imagine you're going to have me, but you're going to have to educate me. And they did a fabulous job of educating. I mean, they really put it together. They put the numbers together. We, for one time, were ahead of most states on that. Of course, I remember taking the maiden journey on the Europa Star that had to go, hell, halfway to Cuba before you could pull the slot machine, put your quarters in, you know. But we had the most fun that night. They invited members of the legislature, maybe rightly so, who had authorized this, to take the maiden voyage, and it was about as much fun as I've ever had in my life with my britches on. And boy, we had a good time, and we just came back going, this is going to improve public education, improve health care, mental health, so forth. And it did for a season. It did for a long season, because it brought untold revenues in until other folks got the idea from us, and there were other places to go, many places where you didn't have to travel. I think it was just that simple. And I think that's what suppressed the gaming industry so much now in the state of Mississippi. But sure, it was a wonderful idea, a very progressive idea, something very different than anything we'd ever considered ever in this state. And it's a little oxymoronic in a way that a king Bible state would be one of the first to get into the casino gaming industry outside of Nevada and a few other states, New Jersey. I ran against the establishment when I first ran for the Mississippi Legislature in 1980. That's when I had affiliated with the Grand Old Party, which was a well different party then in 1980 than it is today. But I thought that was the horse that I needed to ride in on, and we almost made it. Interestingly enough, I came back 3 years later and defeated the wonderful guy who had beat me by 101 votes in that election, and I served 9 terms. I think I served 1 term, maybe 2, without opposition, which is better than grandma's coconut pie. It's the only way to run, really. But I didn't have that luxury, and I didn't have that luxury for really a couple of reasons that I know of. Number one, I was controversial. I came here controversial. I didn't have to come here. I was a trained embalmer, a profession that could make a lot of money, and so I didn't need this for a living or a livelihood, but every time that I ran for reelection, for 10 times to this Mississippi House of Representatives, I had opposition, and I had some pretty interesting opposition. I had a lot of money thrown against me in many campaigns. I always attacked them with energy like you wouldn't believe, because I knew how to knock on doors, and I knew how to put sweat equity into it. Never did. As a matter of fact, the last campaign I ran was about, I think, $60,000, and I thought I was going to die and go to the booger man's hole for spending that much money. Up until that time, I think the most I'd ever spent on a campaign was $8,000 to $10,000, because I knew everybody. I was the local undertaker. Everybody came to see me one way or another in a year. I didn't have to go out and see them, and sometimes very frequently. And so I was a household name and a household word. Now, the fact of the matter is, I had opposition, and I had a guy named Dushky who decided he was a Mensa, and he was a nice-looking guy and all that kind of stuff, and about my age, actually. He was a little bit younger than me at the time in 2007, maybe 10 years younger than me, and he was going to topple me. And he created, I believe he was the first person I'd ever known in my life that knew how to Photoshop, because he put me in all white clothes and a white hat and white boots and white socks and a white belt, and called me Boss Holland, and just told some of the most atrocious lies I've ever heard of in my life. My mother served in, my late mother Sadie served in public office of some type for 51 years of her 90 years. And she had served as a judge in Lee County, and unfortunately had to sentence Mr. Dushky for some pretty atrocious crimes. He was a Taekwondo guy and had young kids in his presence, and I think he did more than karate chops a few times or something. I don't know what the heck. It's all a matter of public record. It didn't bother me. But he was going to topple me, and I beat him 85% to 15%, best I remember. Pretty darn close. I never acknowledged that he was even alive. And he was wanting to do all these debates and all this kind of stuff, and I just knocked on the doors and said, you know who I am. If you want to send me back, fine. If you don't, I'll live with that, you know. But I had opposition, and then Dushky later on was involved in sending ricin letters to my mother, Judge Sadie Holland, to President Obama, and to United States Senator Roger Wicker. He got in trouble for that and ultimately was sentenced to 25 years in the federal penitentiary for it. I hate that for him, and I hate that for my mother, and I hate that for the controversy that it started. But he obviously, his Mensa, really, I think he would have been better served to go to a mental health ward than he would have a federal pen. And he might have been more comfortable, might could have been redeemed for that. But the record speaks for him. I don't have to say anything else about him. He was sentenced after major trials and major FBI investigations and so forth. And it could be the fodder for an upcoming Netflix documentary. Well, that was at a time when the state of Mississippi was drastically transitioning its political position, shall I say. And the Republicans were not in the supermajority, but they were gaining steam right and left. And there was all this bashing of, I guess, people who didn't look like them or act like them or attend the same functions that they attended or go to the same churches that they went to. It just seemed like it was an attack, an all-out assault on fundamental quality of life and origin of people. And I was sitting right here in this seat one day, and I had heard so much. I don't even really remember the particular issue, but it had pinned me. I had pins in my butt, and I was sick of what they were trying to do. So I ran downstairs, and I got my lawyer up, and I said, hey, I want you to introduce a bill that's going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, because by God, if they're so distraught with Hispanics, I'll just be damned if we need a Gulf of Mexico. That's not good. Well, I did it strictly for the fun of it, but I'm telling you, for the first day, I thought I was going to have FBI security, because people from all over the country, even all the national talk shows, came down on me. And finally, after several interviews, they realized that it was just a spoof on the current change in the political climate of this state and the nation, and to just bring attention. And boy, cartoonists, news people, I mean, folks everywhere just did a full frontal assault on me, and then they got a big chuckle about it later on. Nothing ever happened, of course, but Marshall Ramsey, my dear friend, sure had fodder with a bunch of cartoons for a long period of time over it. I guess when you grow up on a farm and you got 5 brothers and no sisters, and you have some 15 to 20 farmhands that are your best buddies and colleagues, adults and their children and families, you learn to be a pretty good debater. And so I got to learn that early on. I also was involved, because of my agricultural background, in Future Farmers of America and the 4-H Club, of which I won, I can't remember the year of my life, the National Extemporaneous Speaking Contest at 4-H Club. And so I learned to debate early, but I also credit a lot of that ability to sitting on the knee of Congressman Jamie Whitten in Washington, D.C., and listening to the real old-time 70s politicians, Hubert Humphrey, Ted Kennedy. Oh, my God, the list could go on and on and on. Everett Dirksen from Illinois. I would go to appropriations with Mr. Whitten. That was part of my job, to just carry his briefcase, by gosh, and sit there. And if he needed a glass of water or a glass of something, I'd go get it for him. But the beauty of that is, I got to see this in action, and it whetted my appetite like it never been whetted for public service. And I came home in 1980 and ran the first time, straight out of Mr. Whitten and, well, at the time, Senator Cochran's employ. But I came here knowing how to debate. And I also had a lady by the name of Miss Bertie Patton when I was 6 years old, who drove the 1948 bookmobile to the Sadie J farm, where Mother had some 30 to 40 people she was supervising chopping cotton. And Miss Bertie took me into that bookmobile. In the first year, I read 45 books, because, as Miss Bertie Patton said, you may not can come to the library, but we can bring the library to you and expose you to the world. So I went into life loving literature, loving reading, still do, and it gave me all of these skills. So as we move forward, the Clarion Ledger, in their infinite wisdom, I don't remember the year, seems like it was about 2012 or 13, decided they were going to give out a Best Orator in the State of Mississippi award. Well, I won it the first year, and they called it You Golden Tongue Devil Award, and we went down to some hotel downtown Jackson, drank whiskey and had toast, and I got this wonderful plaque that still hangs on the wall in my office in the funeral home that brings a lot of people to conversation when they come into my office, because it's uniquely named, You Golden Tongue Devil. And I won that the first year, the second year, and the third year. And so when they called me on the third year and told me I'd won it again, I said, well, by God, I'm going to refuse it. They saw the people that can speak in this legislature other than me. So the Clarion Ledger named it the Representative Steve Holland You Golden Tongue Devil Award, and now it's named after me. And I don't even know who's receiving it now. I sure would like to know, but it was a high honor to me. It really was, because it said that I had a grasp of the process. And there are many cartoons and many articles written by journalists and other thinkers and editors in this state that said maybe one of the few people who could literally change a vote on the floor of the House was the oratorical skills of Steve Holland. And that was an honor to me, not a boast. It was a big honor because I was representing my people and people like them all over the state of Mississippi. When I took to that podium, it was pretty interesting. I had one older lady at home who couched it this way. She said, I've been watching when we put it on the airwaves, you know. One of the first fights I ever had was for MPB up here. You know, poor people need a right to know what's going on in the world, too. And I was always transparent from the beginning. But this old lady came up to me and said, there's one thing about it, Stevie. When you go up to speak, you could hear a mouse fart on the floor of the House. And I took that as a big, big honor for her to say that, because when I took to the podium, if nothing else, just for the comic that I might add to the process, the speaker didn't have to gavel anybody down to listen to me. They just listened. And if they didn't, I'd gavel them down myself. I guess we were in the last days of Speaker Ford's reign. That was 2001. And there was a growing movement. It came out of the Black Caucus as much as anything, and rightly so, to change the Mississippi state flag. Other states were doing it. Corporations nationwide were getting involved. Great sporting events, NCAA, et cetera, was coming down on states that had any reference to the old Confederacy at all in their flags and their state symbols. And I didn't fall where I should have really at first on that. I did, I guess by virtue of my outspokenness at the time, got appointed by Speaker Ford to represent the 1st Congressional District of Mississippi on the Flag Commission, of which the late great Governor William Winter chaired. There were several of us on that, and we had field hearings in 15 locations around the state of Mississippi. And before it was over, we almost had Civil War #2. It was one of the worst things I've ever been involved in. I was also earlier in my career appointed to the commission to change the state constitution. It got almost as hairy as the flag debate did, but not quite, because the flag was flying on the back of every pickup truck in the state of Mississippi. It was a great identity measure. I landed at that time with those wayfaring souls who took it from a historical standpoint. Now, I don't know what specialty I have in my life, but I'm a great, great student of history. I love reading histories of anything. I'll go into any town and pick up a book and know all about that town if there's a book written about it before I leave. I've always had that ability and that desire to do that. So I had great-grandfathers that fought for the South in the Civil War. As a matter of fact, my great-grandfather Muntz went AWOL at the Battle of Franklin, and he had a little old paltry tombstone at the New Chapel Cemetery in Etowah County, and I developed a passion that we had to do better, and I set off on a journey to get him a Civil War government-issued grave marker, and finally got Archives and History to dig out his records, and it said basically Lewis Philip Muntz went AWOL at the Battle of Franklin. He walked to Corinth, Mississippi, where he fell in the arms of a voluptuous woman, took her to Boonville, and he died shortly thereafter, and they drug his carcass back to Etowah County, Mississippi. His war records say that. So I was able to get him a Civil War monument. Great historical thing. I don't know why my grandfather went AWOL. I can't find that out because there's nothing more than that one record. But the fact of the matter is, there were a lot of people in the South, I think, who marginally liked our old flag because of its historical nature. Now, I can give you one more example of something that happened in my own county. I was sitting at my funeral home. It's very related to this flag commission. A double first cousin on the mama side, anyway. I went to my business about 7:30 one morning. I guess there were 20 black ministers that were already at my business about 7:45 in the morning. And it was after this flag debacle of 2001. It was somewhere about 2010. And they said, we're here to ask you to provide leadership to get the Confederate monument moved off the courthouse in downtown Tupelo. And I said, well, gentlemen, I couldn't be more grateful for your courageousness in coming to ask me, but I'll be no part of that because I believe in history. And I opened my middle drawer of my desk and I pulled out a check, and I wrote a check for $2,000. And I said, we have officially started a task force to raise money for a monument to the civil rights workers in Lee County. And we have a beautiful monument that sits totally diagonally from the Confederate monument on the grounds of the Lee County Courthouse, which is a beautiful celebration of the civil rights movement in our area. That was my response to it, and I say that only to say that's how I loved history. I don't think you can revise history, but you also don't have to slop and bask in it either. So I was the one in that commission after we had had 15 field hearings and folks had thrown stuff at Governor Winter, and it just was ugly. It was the ugliest face of public policy I witnessed in my 36 years of being in the legislature, bar none. Even the Medicaid debacle of 2005 was not, it was emotionally as intense, but it didn't bring out the same kinds of people that the 2001 Flag Commission did. But when we had all of our hearings, Governor Winter looked at me and Ed Blackman, gentleman from Madison County, distinguished gentleman from Madison County, and said, boys, take it to the legislature and let's change the flag. And Representative Chairman Blackman was eager to do that. And I said, oh, but alas, guys, we're not ready. We're just not ready. It will fail. I can tell you what the vote will be. So let's let the people of the state of Mississippi decide it in referendum. And we did that, and about 73 or 4% of the people of Mississippi voted to keep the same flag. Well, the era of my doing that, as I see it today, was that ultimately the flag did need to change. And I'm wearing the new state flag, and I wear it every day of my life on my lapel because I think it speaks to the more modern, the more progressive, and the futuristic Mississippi. And I finally understood academically and emotionally why that flag should change. But in the process, I sure learned a lot by being on that commission, and I sure met a lot of Mississippians, many of who wanted to tar and feather me, and many who wanted to build statues on their courthouse square of me. You know, you got to finally take a side. I took the wrong side on that. But guess what? The day on the Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. that the flag vote was taken to change the flag in Mississippi, I had already gotten out of the legislature. I had a funeral in Jackson, Mississippi. I pulled my hearse out here on the parking lot of the Capitol and walked in. Nobody knew I was in town. And my friend Speaker Gunn recognized me, and he said, because I wanted so badly to be able to give a speech, he said, the former gentleman from Lee is in the chamber today. I'm going to ask him to come up and lead this body in the opening prayer. And it was the dangest prayer I ever prayed. It lasted about 20 minutes. I gave the speech I wanted to give about changing the flag. So live long enough and you get justice. It's the moral of that story. Well, by 2017, I was close to being committed to the Holland Mental Hospital in Tupelo, which took me about 10 years to secure because I was getting a belly full of the new regime here. I'm just telling the truth about it. I was getting a belly full. So in my infinite wisdom, as I said earlier, I sat on appropriations the whole time I was in the legislature. And some bill came up, by golly, to do this for this, and I just added an amendment to appropriate a couple of $1 million for the wall, Trump's wall. And, of course, the same thing happened about that just about instantaneously as did happen about the Gulf of America. It was just a spoof to show people how silly it was getting in the political process and how gut rot it had gotten and how we were taking issues that were less, in my opinion, less important than other issues that were more important to the citizens of our state anyway. So I threw the I threw the elephant out in the crowd, and you'd be surprised how many bought into it. The one thing, and I commit this from the bottom of my heart, that I don't ever want to happen is somebody to think that I am so vain that I would brag about any award that I got, because every award I ever accepted, and I did get a bunch of them in my 36-year tenure, it was because of the work that I did on behalf of my people, not because of me. Same thing that I felt when I can speak, not boastfully, but proudly, of the fact that in all the years I served, we never lost a bill that came from a committee that I chaired. I just knew some tenets of leadership, and I empowered people. And I think that's the way you do it in the political process. I got called by a very conservative group. I can't even remember the name of it, just tell you the truth this very moment. But anyway, it was very much conservative, and they said, "Mr. Chairman, what are you doing on such and such a date?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do I need to do?" They said, "Well, we want you to be the first member of the legislature to ever be inducted into the Mississippi Political Hall of Fame." And honestly, I got very emotional at that moment, because it was a big honor to me. I'd served down here and sacrificed a whole lot to be down here. And I had taken, in all of my levity and in all of my court jester role, my role of being a progressive legislator very, very seriously. And I said, of course I will accept that, and of course I will be there. I said, who else is being honored? And then they told me, Haley Barber will be inducted with you. And I went, oh, my lovable archenemy. How good can life be to share the podium with my dear friend Haley Barber? And we had an enormous crowd. I think we raised a bunch of money for something. I don't even know what the cause was, but it wasn't the Koch brothers, thank God. It was something in Mississippi, scholarships or something. And Haley and I just roasted each other at that affair, and people were 500 to 600 people, I guess, that gathered and paid big money to be there, were very well entertained. And we also have the distinction, I do, of being the first I don't know how many's been inducted since then, because I hadn't been asked back. But I got that plaque on my wall at my funeral home, and I look at it every now and then and go, you know, as tough as the journey was, sometimes it ended pretty sweet to get that honor. And my whole family got to come down. We came in our funeral home limousine. And it was a little bit like the Clampetts coming, but we enlightened the crowd. At least I had my sweet mama with me, and she held my hand through all of it, and I looked out, and she was crying, and that really touched me, because she was proud of her boy. Well, what happened was I was sitting at this very desk, and I think my buddy John Grisham had been in town that day, and we'd taken, three of us had taken lunch, and we'd had a highball or two during lunch, and I came in here we took up books at 2 o'clock, and I came in about 1:45, and I sat down in this chair, and I felt a little faint, and I said, well, maybe it was top drawer vodka is what it was instead of anything else. And I sort of leaned up against my desk like this, and my dear friend Nick Bain was sitting right here, and he said, Holland, there's something wrong with you. And I said, I am feeling a little funny, Nick. He said, look at your hands. And I did, and all through the pores of my hands, and even shortly thereafter, all across my body, there was just brown stuff pouring out of the pores of my skin. And my dear friend, Dr. Sid Bondurant, was from Grenada, was the doctor of the day. We keep a doctor in the Capitol because on any given day during the legislative session, there's 3,000 people in this building. It's like a little city unto itself. And so they wheelchaired me downstairs, and the last thing that I remember was Dr. Bondurant hollering for a highway patrol and said, this guy is fully septic. He will not live long enough for the ambulance to come and get him. Get your patrol car under the porte-cochere. And I don't remember anything else for about 48 days that I was in a coma at University Hospital, flatlined 3 times, finally underwent a 12-hour surgery, whereas the physicians out there termed it in the vernacular, we took all of your body organs out and pressure washed them because they couldn't get rid of the sepsis. Well, to make that story relevant, I can get a tooth pulled and go under anesthesia with my dentist and sleep a week. I just don't do anesthesia. And I was under anesthesia for about 12 hours. So immediately as I recouped and came back to the chamber, it was a struggle. I mean, I literally had to learn sort of to talk again, to walk, and my thinking process was probably the slowest of coming back to me. And we went through about a year of this. I went septic again while in Tupelo and had to be airlifted back down here to Jackson. And thank goodness for that shining light on the hill, University of Mississippi Medical Center, which I have always been so incredibly fond of and supportive of. We finally got through the sepsis thing, but in the process, I was losing my short-term memory. And Mississippi, University of Mississippi Medical Center is one of 5 sites across the nation that is a National Institute of Health Center of Excellence for the study of dementia and Alzheimer's. We call it the Mind Center. Beautiful program. And I went through all the testing and it showed dementia. Well, my father had 7 siblings. I buried all 7 of them. They're all gone. And every one of them's death certificate says dementia, Alzheimer's. It runs in my family. So, and going through the testing and UMC doing their work, they concluded that I had frontotemporal dementia, which is the most rapidly progressing form of dementia here in the frontotemporal lobe, where all of your thought process comes from and all of your mental directives come. And they basically, not in a pessimistic way, but in just in a statement of reality, said, we're diagnosing you with dementia and you just may not be with us in 3 years. And so it's time for you to go home and get your heart right with the Lord and get your business affairs in order. And I did what they said because I believed in them that much. I already had my heart right with the Lord, but I got it a little more secure. And I asked for a lot of forgiveness for a lot of the sins that I've done, just like I did every time I faced my public every 4 years in re-election. It hadn't all been a bed of roses, people of Lee County. I have sinned, but I'm going to try to sin minimally like we Methodists try to do because we know we can't quit sinning along the way. But I stayed in the Mind Center, and I was convinced that maybe I did have dementia, and I had good reason for it. Their diagnosis, number one, in the family history that I came from through the Holland side. And I was getting geared up for the downfall, so I came back into the chamber, and in maybe one of the most emotional and profound speeches that I ever gave, I just announced to my friends on the floor of the House that my time looked like it was coming to an end, and I expressed my gratitude for, number one, the friendships that became and remain to this good day so rich and so special in my life. And I expressed gratitude for my family and for all of my supporters back home, but I said I can't come back down here. It's not the right thing to do. I have to enter a new level and a new dimension of my life, and I need to be at home. I said, I am going to stay as long as my health allows me, but I will not seek re-election. Well, Labor Day, I was at my farmhouse on the Sadie J, and I had been really messed up. I even went back to the funeral home, and my sweet mother would write notes in the palm of her hand just to tell me what family we were serving in the funeral home. That's how bad my short-term memory was. And I would sometime leave against her will in my car, and instead of driving to my home in Plantersville, I'd wind up in New Albany or Fulton or wherever. It just was about 8 or 9 months to where I had no reason to not believe that something was happening to me. And I got up on that beautiful Labor Day morning at the farm, and my mind was going 90 to nothing, almost like a tilt-a-whirl at the fair. It just was spinning, and things were coming back into my mind that I had forgotten. And so that was a holiday, but on Tuesday I called my lead doctor, at UMC, and I said, I hate to report to you, Doc, but I think I just got over the dementia yesterday. And of course, they said, you need to come on back down for another appointment. And I did. And I did just what they said. And they said, no, this is something temporary. You're not over it. And I just said, now look, you've given me the diagnosis. I'm going to do what I can do. But I don't intend on stopping. For some reason, I feel a revisionist opportunity is coming my way. And sure enough, it didn't take but about 30 days. My thinking was just as clear as it had ever been. I'd already announced this fact that I'm probably going to go away in a finite amount of time, and that my time would be no more, and I was going to be where I felt like I needed to be most, at home during this time. And it just wasn't to be. It's just that simple. I go even a step further. I think it was a miracle that there was another purpose for me in life. And so I got a lot of ribbing about it from some people who said, you, by God, know theatrics better than anybody I've ever seen. No, there was no theatrics to it. It was a very real thing. I got desperate. You can ask any of my colleagues. I couldn't even half the time remember their name. And I got over it, thanks to God. That's all I can say. And mighty good doctors, I guess. I don't know. You can call it maybe a misdiagnosis. I think that's fair. I have no hard feelings, and I'm still just as proud this day of the Mind Center at the University of Mississippi Medical Center as I've ever been. But it didn't happen to me. And this is what, 6, 7 years later? I'm sharp as a two-edged sword. Not only can I sometime remember by 4 o'clock in the afternoon what I had for breakfast, but I can remember what I had for breakfast in the first grade. And that's been a long time ago. So it was a quirky, interesting kind of thing that was real and then suddenly became healed. And I'm grateful for that. And it was not a joke, and it was not a spoof on my part like many had been in the past. I went through about 9 months of really bad mental health. But I'm fine. I take no medicine. Well, as time moved on and I got to feeling better after the dementia diagnosis, I stayed here. I didn't go home. I didn't have to go home. But I was seeing the handwriting on the wall, not the handwriting of the fact that I couldn't come back down here if I wanted to. I was realizing that 36 years my business had grown exponentially at home. My mother was in her mid to late 80s, and she was having to run the funeral home as well as still sit on the bench in Lee County as a judge. And I literally sought providential guidance on the thing, and I decided that it was best that I go ahead and just retire on my own volition. Again, without being vain, there was the largest outcry I have ever seen in my life from my people. Yes, you shall run again. And I was saying, no, I don't even want to run again. And they said, you got to run. You're the voice. You're the one voice that we've got left now down there that is at least aligned somewhat with what we need, whether it's politically popular or not, and you're not so bashful that you won't espouse it every second that you're down there. So we got to have your voice. And I let them convince me. And then the other thing that happened was reapportionment. And by this time, I guess I had excoriated my Republican brothers and sisters to such a point that they said, screw him. And I went from about, I don't remember, maybe high 40s African-American district to 60s. And a very good friend of mine and a colleague of my mother's on the bench, Judge Ricky Thompson, ran for the seat, and I think he defeated me 120 votes. And my spirit wasn't in it. And I honestly have to admit, I was not too disappointed at all. And I have spent very little time in Jackson since then, very little time, because I'm a part of history now. Well, the Republican supermajority felt like they couldn't get rid of me any other way, so they used a tactic that's commonly known as gerrymandering, where they put my residents in Plantersville in territory that I never run in that was almost supermajority African American, black voting age population. People that I'd always identified with and people that I loved and people that I was very fair with. But let's face political reality. If given a chance, black people will vote for black people, and the reverse is true of white people. If they got a white to vote for, most of them are going to do that. So I didn't feel hard about that. But I did not have the spirit of my 36 years in my heart anymore. I had gotten to be in my 60s, and I was somewhat tired of the trips down the Natchez Trace. I was struggling to run my ever-growing business at home and mesh it with this. And the dear soul to me, my mother was aging, and I wanted to be with her. So to say that I was disappointed when I lost by 120 votes would be a lie. I wasn't. I'm just telling the truth about it. I didn't want to come back down here to start with. And I still have an interest in this place. I will die having an interest in public policy. It's just the font from which I flow. And I have enough case histories of where my being in the process had made the difference to the people of this beleaguered state. And that's why I maintain an interest. I don't have to be elected. I will never, I don't think, ever run for a seat in the legislature again as long as I live. I don't need to. Hell, I backed into my funeral home last night with my pickup truck in the cold gray light of day. So I don't even need to be driving down here anymore, you know. But life's good, and I like to think back, and I like to talk about the past, but I still, more importantly, love to talk about the future. And I'm glad that there are decent people still offering themselves for public office, no matter what the climate, no matter what the party is in this state. There are good people who can make a difference still if they would just offer and independently think and have the forthwithal to be progressive enough beyond the moment into the future. The light is always on for those people. Well, I wish for us as a public legislative body to return to debate. Theocracy don't work. Top-down stuff don't work. Bottom-up stuff works for a progressive government. I've always felt that way. I feel just as strongly this moment as I did in 1980 when I first offered for public office. And I will feel as strongly about that in any public office I might seek to serve in the future or do serve in. It is just the hallmark, the very foundation, the very Rubicon for public service. You've got to be open-minded. You have really got to lay politics aside, and that's hard for a politician to do, let's face it. It's sort of like telling a doctor to lay his utensils aside. You know, he can't hardly work with it. You do have to work within a structure, but we've got serious problems in our democracy now that are not unsolvable, but it's going to take independent thinking, forward-thinking people to bring us out of the almost identical abyss that we were in when we started rescuing the state in the 1987 term of the legislature. Those 49 of us that were elected at the same time that were under the age of 40. Bad, regressive times never last in a democracy. I think we're in a period of the history of this state to where we're going to have to regroup. We're going to have to study history a little bit more. We're going to have to study the progressive times in this state versus those times where we seem to slip into a less progressive mode. I even thought very seriously about running for the legislature again because I've yet been gerrymandered again into a district that is almost identical with the exception of about 5 precincts to the original district I ran in 1980, a place where all of my people for 5 generations have come from. the place I have made my place in life from, where my people are all bedrock. And I thought about doing it as a Republican, if you can imagine that, just so I could go into the Republican caucus and say, oh, you fools, you know better than this. This is childish, this policy. It's childish that you're not even giving consideration or allowing a vote on Medicaid expansion. It is the albatross around the citizens of this state that you won't vote a true pro-life ticket. But I got over that thought real quick because I can't drive back down here, and I'm scared to drink the water in Jackson right now. And I'm in my late 60s, and I don't want to die of epizoo if I can help it at this point. But there is a future, and it's not dull, it's bright. We go through these cycles. If you study the history of the United States of America or any of its political state subdivisions, or you go all the way down to Robert E. Lee County, Mississippi, where I was born and will likely die, it goes through cycles. And they too will pass at some point, and something will come in its place. We've just got to keep democracy alive through the valley. And I think we can do that. I'll tell you what I have surmised, and especially in the last 8 years and certainly the last 4 years, there were some of the brightest young Republicans elected to this legislature that I had ever seen. People who are, number one, well-educated, who indeed are family people, who indeed think progressive. But this system has shrouded their ability. It has stifled it to the point that they've been made to be little tin soldiers. And I wish just like the 49 of the folks elected in 1983 would do, and just start an incredible revolution to come to the middle a little more. I didn't say go to the left, but come to the middle a little bit more and realize that some of these policies have to be initiated for survival purposes in this state. If so, I could die a wonderfully happy dead man, and I hope I live long enough to see that.